All right, I'm gonna call this to order. So if we can cover what we need to cover, then, who am I missing here? I miss, then we will cancel Wednesday's meeting, but we do need to schedule a meeting sometime between today and the 21st of January, so we can discuss and vote on what we're going to present on the 21st to the Board of Ed. In addition, we have to deal with the teacher's contract, and for the second year in a row, as I'm just looking at when the Rules Committee meets and not anything else on the calendar, we have a scheduled meeting on Martin Luther King's birthday, and since we're not allowed to meet at the Goose, that meeting is canceled. And so, as I said, I did it because it was the day before the 21st. But we're gonna have to figure out some time to meet there, and go from there. Anyway, I had a message from Bert, and I thought it was worthwhile to do, since we do have some, the books in there, right?
Thank you, sir.
We do have some new people in the budget process to sort of explain. You didn't do anything wrong, you don't have to go in the corner.
We're coming in the corner again.
He belongs in the corner.
The process that we're going to go through is, and it's the same for really the town and the Board of Ed. Right now, this is the superintendent's budget. Until they're going to have several meetings, we're going to have input into some thoughts, some additional information that we can request. And my philosophy is to get to the various boards, either the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Ed, prior to their voting, because once the horse has left the barn, it's hard to address any of this stuff. And so then they present to the Board of Finance, which will be the next place that we will try and address certain things if we couldn't get something addressed in the budget. And then, in theory, we should have done all of our work so that 5 minutes after the Board of Finance votes on their budget, we can vote on ours. Now, that's much different than many of us who have done budgets in the corporate world. And so I'm going to allow Bert to talk about it, since he wrote it up so nicely, to talk about some of his thoughts to help explain what the differences are.
Well, what I sent Jack was that some of us are new to finance and budget, and others are new actually to the budget process, any budget process. And the budget process is really a plan for the next year. And normally you start out for the plan for next year with looking at what you have this year. What's going to change next year? Now, I've been doing budgets for a very long time, for banks, for corporates, and now for 3 not-for-profits, and certainly for my family. I never meet the budget targets because my wife has her own ideas of spending.
CFO.
She's probably listening right now. Anyway,
I have a bed if you need it.
I might. And if you're involved with the corporate world or not-for-profit, you want to know as much as you can about the previous year before you start planning the next year. However, that's not really possible in the world that we're living in for the town budget or any municipal budget, because it takes so long to get it through the process. For instance, if our fiscal year at the DCA, Daring Community Association, starts on June 1, we sit down for the DMA, the Daring Men's Association, sometime in May, what happened all year, then we're ready and we have the budget that starts then. For the town, that would mean if we could get together in May or June and decide what's going to go on next year, we already know what happened last year, and we can sit and develop a plan for the following year. We can't do that right now or any other time because the planning starts in the fall. Departments will need to find out what they need for the following years. It has to go to the department heads and to the administration and the Board of Education or the Board of Selectmen, and from there it goes eventually through the Board of Finance and different permutations to where we are, and which is in May. So in May 10, I think it's this year, we'll be done with it. For a budget that starts to cover a period that starts in July. So this system where we tie into the actual data to find out for the following year doesn't work for us. There's a couple of ways that we can improve on that. It will never be perfect. And one of the ways I would suggest is we revisit actual versus budget more often. That's really important information, because then that tells you what you were planning to do and what actually happens. And that has some impact on the following year and years. And there isn't really much on that other than you ask for it, and we have asked for it. And I think Taylor Carter did an analysis on that last year for the Board of Education, and I did one this year for the last 3 years on the town budget. And it tells you a lot of things. But everyone is handicapped, of course, when you start out building one plan on top of another plan, instead of building a plan on top of some actual numbers. Because if there's any bias in the previous plan, it has a tendency to continue. And so when we look at the Board of Education, we find that yes, there were some misses. When you miss the budget, you could say that's a great thing, because the Board of Education missed it by 336,000 in fiscal year 2019, and by 729,000 and some other amounts in the previous years. They call these misses.
Which direction?
In other words, the amount that was returned to the town.
Right.
So I do want to make a comment on that 700,000.
Okay.
That was, over the years, we have something called excess cost reimbursement. And there was a whole category, in fact, I was speaking to Heather at the Board of Ed today. There was a whole category of students that we had never submitted, which was ELP. So when we submitted that, all of a sudden, our numbers on excess cost jumped. In addition, we had some new students that came in.
And again, excess cost of revenue for us ultimately.
Well, it's, you can call it a revenue, I call it a reimbursement of expenses.
Okay.
All right?
From the
Contract.
state.
From the state, yes.
Yeah.
So we also had some students that came in that were high costs that were not anticipated during the budget process, which also added to that. And if you looked at the special ed cost center in that year, some of those funds were used to offset the fact that they were over what was budgeted, because this was unanticipated. So you have to be cautious on that. And the one thing I did want to say to Mr. Cini at my closing remarks, when he said, maybe we should tighten this up, because if we end up going over our budget, we can just go to the Board of Finance and they're just going to give us that money. And I'm thinking, number one, no, they're not. Number two, it has to come to the RTM. And number three, from a psychological perspective, when you have $100 million budget, and if I was managing it, I would rather be over by $300,000 and know that I had that cushion than try to explain to somebody why I need $50,000 on a $100 million budget and I couldn't find it elsewhere by coming back. So psychologically, you need that type of flexibility. The other thing that I did, because Bert is going to mention, if he hasn't already, that the average amount of what the town has given back over the last 8 years is about $300,000. It's a $300,000 give back on a $90 to $100 million budget. That's not a lot. Let me just finish. On the same token, how we figure out what we collect for taxes is we take the last 5 years collection rate. This is a new formula that was implemented over the last couple of years. And we reduce that by 25 basis points, and that's what we use as our collection rate against the grand list to quantify what our taxes are going to be. That amount of money, not a lot, it's 0.25%, right? Well, on our grand list, 25 basis points has some flexibility in there equal to approximately $350,000, more than the average of what the school has given back over the last 8 years. So, based upon how we do budgets, there are going to be little pockets of flexibility. Now, we want things to be tight and not be fat, but you need, on both the town side and the school side, some flexibility, because you're doing these budgets with really only 4 months of financials coming in, and by the way, we're running it 8 months later. So that's part of the challenge of what we have here. So, when I said there's little pockets, and anytime somebody wants to have a coffee with me, and by the way, you might be surprised who has more pockets than who, the other side. So, I haven't.
Anyway, so
Bert, just
thank you, Jack, because he said 729,000 and he explained where it came from.
Bert,
That's not really my angle. My angle is just for everyone to understand how the system works right now. And really, at this point, I don't care what happened exactly that year or any other year. I just try to find out what we can learn from how the process works, because ultimately, we're the last ones. In May, we're going to make a recommendation to the RTM. We're going to sign off on the budget or not. After that, it's out of our hands. Sorry, Michael.
So Bert, my takeaway then from what Jack said and what you said and Barry's question about what constitutes a miss when you first described it, it misses the two that you cited were instances where the Board of Ed returned to the town $300,000 one year and then over $700,000 the other year. Did I have that right?
Yes,
Okay.
but I don't mean to say that a miss is a negative. Actually, if you ever looked at any budget and it came right on the dollar and cent, somebody fooled around with it. Okay?
Somebody went and spent
Somebody
everything
fooled around with
that they
it.
could to
When
make
I
that
mean
come in.
miss, it says you want to look at something that is different from what you originally planned. When you have no miss, or you have a miss and some other things going on, then in any corporate budget or not-for-profit budget, what often happens, that late in the previous budget year, you spend some money that you had in the budget saying, use it or lose it. Everyone does it, okay? We had some money in the budget, let's get it out of the way. So when I talked earlier about doing actual versus budget, I meant also to say that it's the time frame should be looked at. If finally you make your budget and it's all in the last months, I want to see what went on. Okay, the last month suddenly all these items are getting booked, and the budget is balanced or only has a small surplus. Then you want to look at it. Overall, if you have a $300,000 payback to the town, on average, in last year, that's very little. On $100 million, as Jack said, on a $100 million budget, that's nothing. It's 30 basis points.
Yes.
So, I just want to sensitize everybody to how this actually works, because when you open the budget book, everywhere, any department, every RC, Responsibility Center, it starts with, on the text side, it says, notable budget line items changes, and it refers to last year's budget and to this year's budget. It does not refer to any actual numbers that had ever happened. Okay? When you open the budget book, you see all these columns. Okay? You have a 2016 actual, 2017 actual, 2018 actual, 2019 actual, then it jumps. Then it becomes a budget. Then it says something about estimated. That is not really a change to the budget other than some revisions that have been made. And revisions are being made all the time, obviously. The budget is a living instrument. But I think I would have liked to see, when I look at the actuals for these 3 budget years, I would have liked to see the budget for the 3 years, because then I see much more what's going on. And that was part of the analysis that Jack asked me to do, so we compared the actuals to the budget, and we should always do that, because it tells you a lot.
I do want to interrupt again. There's been a lot of conversation about transfers that go on. I think it's silly. And I'll tell you why I think it's silly. When I ran an 800-person operations area and I had a budget, I was living with a rolling budget. That means I could revise during the course of the year what my expenses were, what my incomes were going to be, and at times I was told what my expenses had to go down to, or based upon a new project, what I could increase. I look at the transfers that occur during the course of the year as what is really in a corporate world would be the rolling budget. I plan this 12 months out. Okay, my teacher that I thought was earning $90,000 has decided to leave. I'm replacing it with a $60,000 teacher. Last year they had a situation where to get a math teacher, it costs $20,000 more than what they had budgeted. So they have to move things back and forth on what's going on. And so I look at the transfers as being nothing more than the rolling budget that I had in the corporate world as I'm moving things forward. But because they're given a total appropriation, and quite honestly, I say this is an appropriation for the Board of Ed, with everything in this document really being placeholders. because we get a heck of a lot more detail than many of the other towns do. So I'm trying to give you a different perspective that, yes, I do look at what the transfers are because that helps us understand what's going on during the current year. And in the Board of Ed, there's 8 or 9 categories which are really the official transfers. So there was some discussion going on that, oh, you're doing a lot of transfers between salary and homes and salary at the high school. Terrible. But in reality, based upon what the state says, that's not really a transfer. Transfer is if I'm moving money from salaries into operations. It has to move between, there's 8 categories, 9 categories, has to move between those categories before it really becomes an official transfer that requires approval by the Finance Committee on the Board of Ed and then the Board of Ed in general. So in the past, we had all those other numbers, but they included things that really officially weren't an official transfer based upon what the state accounting requirements are.
And Jack said something important, because in the corporate world, the budget is more than, oh, at one time, I take a look ahead. No, you take a look ahead and a look back every month. You revisit where you were planning to go and where you're going, what happened. Of course, in the world of the municipalities, that's different because, quite frankly, most of the process is driven by the ultimate goal, and the ultimate goal is to find out what the mill rate is going to be. And for the RTM to approve the mill, or I guess the Board of Finance to set the mill rate, and we're making a recommendation and the RTM to approve the mill rate. I just want everyone to know that then it's not over. It shouldn't be over for the administration, and I don't think it ever is. And it shouldn't actually be over for the Board of Finance, and I don't think it is. And it shouldn't be over for FNB, because you want to revisit, okay, from time to time.
So, it's just, you know, what I'm just thinking myself is, all great points, Bert, and the role of anchoring any analysis on actual data. The actual data really has a significance to that. So how does this resonate with the people developing the budgets? I mean, do they rely on actual data? Do they make the presentations in that context? Do they refer to actual data?
I have no reason to believe that they don't look at the actual data. Okay? I mean, how can you make a budget if you don't?
But you have a limited amount of actual data, and that's the problem. So,
Okay.
like I was speaking to Heather about some of the calculations that they do on excess cost and some of the projections that went on. But we knew last budget season that there were several children that were aging out, and therefore we were going to see approximately $1 million drop in the amounts of expenses that we could submit to the state. Conversely, it did not mean that we did not have the same $1 million being spent, so that we were seeing $1 million drop in it, because we had other students that were coming in more than what we had before. However, they weren't making the threshold that allowed us to submit, or because our threshold has gone up and IEPs have changed, some of those thresholds are changing. So that's part of the projections that go on, and they do look at that. They know what their projected enrollment is, they know how many classes, they figure out what the sections are. They look at, in the high school, I have so many students, I need so many openings, I have so many AP courses, other things that are going on, and so they can calculate out what its teaching staff is that they need to do that. which obviously changed from being 4.5 to now 5, under the new contract. So, yes, they're doing it, but this year, I believe the number was we had 80 more in October count. We had 80 more students in special ed than we had before.
It was 60.
Oh, 60 rather, and someplace in the neighborhood of 30 or more of them were students returning to district. Now, some of those students we were paying out of district tuition to, which is good, which means programs now are meeting their needs. Others were returning to district, and parents had been doing private placement of those. So when they come in, we should expect to see an increase in some of the support service for those students that weren't here before. And even though the number used to be that if a school placement cost $100,000, it really would cost the district $60,000 of certain services that were already here. So really the net saving was only 40%, because you still had to all of a sudden come up with things. But we can get into that a little bit more. We just wanted to give a little overview of this is different, and you're going to hear us start to talk about some of the pockets that are out there, and go from there. But
Go ahead.
go ahead.
One quick comment. I've not heard, and maybe I just wasn't paying attention. So in a corporate budget, what I'm used to is my boss says, whether it be revenue or expenses or the net number, you're up, down, 0. And at least in the corporate world, that's not a suggestion, that's what you're doing. Doesn't feel like there's that same level of definitive bottom line perspective here. Or maybe I missed it, and there is.
There is.
And I'm just asking that, so I know how to evaluate
Who
this.
did you work for?
A lot of different people, it was always in
And that
finance.
one, and that's.
And then I passed it on to the people underneath
Okay.
me.
So I always like to work for people who told me that's what our objectives are, but if the market changes, you change, okay? You give me an explanation why you miss your budget, that's all I'm saying, okay? You're supposed to miss the budget. If you don't miss the budget, you're rigid, okay? You do things.
On the revenue side, on the expense side, I can control.
Either, well,
On the corporate side, expense.
not always, okay? Unexpected things happen, and you don't control.
I would have to take it from
expense side.
somewhere else.
I have no problem people missing the income side or the expense side, but I want to know about it, and I want to know why.
I agree, all I'm asking is whether or not does that come to us, or we just have a sense?
Okay, I'll let Jack answer.
So, just
Sorry.
Okay, the other
in that,
revisions to the
in that note, I think you have to look at their transfers, because that's where you know where they missed their budget.
That's when you know where there were adjustments to the budget.
I mean, sometimes there's really good rationale because something happened, and luckily they didn't spend the money somewhere else, and so there doesn't have, but sometimes there's some weird things where they, like, I don't know, there was this weird, it's only $7,000, but it's a good example. It's like, they spent more on consulting services, and then they're transferring it out of summer school teaching supplies. And I'm talking, that's a lot of supplies, $7,000 for summer school that they didn't spend?
Well,
Does that mean the consultant? I'm just saying, there are a lot of, like, you can't just look budget to budget. You gotta get the actual in there somewhere, or you're not gonna know what you're missing and why you're missing. It's a three-pronged.
I'm not saying you don't look at them, but the fact that people are making transfers isn't a bad thing.
No, but you have to,
I'm just responding because several people in our government have acted as if it is. So it's in response to that. Pay some attention to one of the other boards here, where it was a very important conversation. So, yes, I agree. And that's part of what you find out. If you over budgeted $7,000 in supplies in summer school, and you had those funds at the end of the year that you can move it from there to consulting services, then the question is, when I'm looking at this year, are you budgeting the same number that you took the 7,000 from last year?
Yes, that's my point.
And that's a point where you say you have to know it, but that's also looking at what was budgeted versus what was spent. And it's one of the things that Kate and Jen had done in the current year's Board of Selectmen budget, which was looking at people that had put in 10,000 every year for certain things. And then when they look at the budget over the actual spend over the last couple of years, it was 5,000. So Kate had a long conversation of whether or not the extra 5,000 was needed. And so, yes, you need them to analyze that.
So if you do the analysis, actual versus budget, it's not a control issue. I mean, Lenin said something about trust and control. Trust is good, control is better. In this instance, it's really about trust, because ultimately, we cannot micromanage any aspect of the huge infrastructure. And so it comes down to, when we do the actual versus planned numbers, we will very quickly see if there's any concern. I have not really seen any concern. You can trust these people are really trying to manage our budgets well, okay? I'm just trying to figure out what is our role in all of this. I do not think that our role is to look at every budget item, line item, okay? I think, and there are some that we have
And we
questions
can have
about. We will
different
get to that.
opinions here, all right? Just wanna
I
let you
don't
know.
think it's our job to look at,
Line
go
item.
line item.
There's some
Sometimes
line
things jump
items.
out at you and
Okay.
you
There's
have
some
questions.
line items that jump at you and you want to know, that's fine. But you can't do every line item, obviously, and you
No,
can't
that's
do
not-
it
I don't
when
think
you
that's our
do the
job.
feedback loop that's called, actual versus budget. And I think that overall, there comes a point when you have to trust the people running it, okay?
But I do want to get back to Bob. The answer is, yes, there are two people, I'm going to say possibly three. There are two people on the Board of Selectmen and one person on the Board of Ed that makes that determination of what we're going to be. So the superintendent is responsible for their budget. They're the ones who sit down and finally says, I agree that we might need this, but you're not getting it, all right? Because I need this budget to come in at X. On the town side, it's Jamie, but before Jamie gets it, Kate has done that as the town administrator. So there are people who set what it's going to be and are responsible, because as we said, and then I want to get into the budget, otherwise we'll be here till 12 o'clock. The fact of the matter is that it is Kate's budget when she presents it to the Board of Selectmen. And so she is responsible for what is in that budget. And she's responsible to have reviewed and negotiated with the department heads what is going to go in this year and what's not going to go in. And by the way, they do the same on what capital projects, which we'll get to, are there and which ones are not. I look at our role maybe a little bit different than Bert. I think that what happens in all budgets, and it was one of the things that I did whenever I took over an area, the first thing I did was call the auditors and say, can you audit this? Because I didn't want to be responsible for what the last four guys were doing under my term. Certain times, things have evolved and keep on going because nobody, and they've been there for 20 years, or they've been there for 10 years, and this is the way we've always done it. And I was never interested in why we did something before. The question is, what should we be doing now? And I think part of what we should be asking is, what should we be doing now? And the longer somebody has been working in this, they're more used to saying, well, you know, we always did $5,000 here, so why, and our job is to say, but why? So one of the projects we might be taking on is working on the balance sheet. When I was looking at the assets, and this is why we should look at reports coming from the Board of Finance and that, I came across a account for $162,000 that was labeled Board of Finance Infrastructure Fund, and it was in Public Works. Hasn't been used for years. It was originally set up for good reason. The RTM sometimes doesn't meet from, you know, July and August, and if you needed to act on something, the Board of Finance therefore had funds in order to go and do it. But it had been around for a long time. But they already have a contingency that, based upon what their closeout is about $860,000. They don't need another contingency there for $162,000. So I brought it to Kate's attention, I brought it to Jen's attention, I spoke to John about it, and they will move it into their overall contingency, which is where it belongs. That's our job, to ask the questions. And we're going to find out that 95% of the time, the people responsible have already done the evaluations on some of this stuff. But it's that 5% that maybe they did, or maybe there's a different way of thinking about it. Another example, which we'll get into, over the years when they and the Board of Ed buy a new system or subscription for a number of years, they're expensing it in the year that they buy it. So I don't know what subscriptions we're paying for. And this year, in the going forward budget, there's a subscription for $170,000 for 6 years. Well, while the Board of Ed can't keep reserves, the town can. So why isn't that, and why aren't we looking at all subscriptions and putting it into prepaid and bringing it back in its appropriate year of going on? That's potentially a $140,000 reduction to the budget that we just saw. Doesn't take away the expense is there, but it's now $30,000 a year instead of $170,000 this year, and then when we look at the budget next year, we're seeing a drop. So those are the type of things that I'd like us to look at. So let's go to the overall. I sent out the superintendent's budget, his presentation from the other day, Thursday, and I need my glasses for this. One of the things I want to mention is page 17, where he talks about the health benefits. So if we end up, just so that everybody has this in concept, if we end up with an 8% increase in the health care, and I know everybody's talking about, oh, the teachers got 3%. Understand, the teachers are paying for 20% of the increase, because, actually 21%, because that's what their share of the healthcare is. So they're seeing their healthcare costs go up by 8% as well, which is a reduction of the 3% salary that they just got. The other side, which as we get further along, you'll see us starting to look at, because one of the things that we changed last year in our budget presentation is we do not control the grand list. That's a market-driven thing. And everybody's so focused on the mill rate. But the mill rate is a function of the grand list that we don't control. What our boards do control are, what are the operating expenses they're requesting? What is the capital they're requesting? How does that compare to the operating and capital that they requested last year? What is the income that they're calculating? How does that compare to the income for the things that they controlled last year? And that's a more important number, in my opinion, when we're evaluating what budgets we've received, actually from three, because the Board of Selectmen controls their operating, with the exception, well, sort of the exception of about $3 million, which is the library, which we support. I mean, I've never seen them do a cut, but the fact is that part of Jamie's budget, or the town's budget, includes a $3 million library expense. The Board of Ed, which is actually a net number because their revenues are included. And then the Board of Finance, because neither the Board of Selectmen nor the Board of Ed control how we pay for things. So if, which happened a couple of years ago, if the Board of Ed makes a $3 million request for capital, but the Board of Finance decides that they're going to bond 1.5 of it, it's unfair to say, oh, capital increase the next year because there's nothing that's being bonded and their capital is 1.6 when we're calculating our taxes. The fact of the matter is, the request went down by 1.4 million. And so part of that budget is responsible for by the Board of Finance. And so their decisions have impact on this budget, whether or not they're paying it from the contingency on the capital reserve fund, whether or not they're paying it from the general fund, whether or not they're paying for it by bonding, or whether or not they've decided they're going to tax for it. So those are the three groups that we're going to look at, and it's going to be what's driving how we're going to look and report these numbers. And then the mill rate is just nothing more than a mathematical calculation. So, based upon the budget that was presented, if you've all read it or haven't seen it, the operating budget appears to be up by 3.46%. Largely driven by, I'm going to say, two categories. One is health and pension benefits. I'm going to say three. Next one is salaries, and there's some staff reduction that are going on there. And the last thing is the change in excess cost reimbursement. So those are the three things that are driving it. There is a reduction, because I went back and checked our list. I believe that 2 years ago, the Board of Ed had about $3 million in capital. Last year, I believe their requested amount is 1.6 million. And this year, their requested capital is 1.3 million. So there's a decrease there. I should also add, when we're doing some of this calculation, if our grand list goes up by 0.5%, 50 basis points, that will generate about 600 to 700. Remember, we're dealing with an $8.4 billion grand list. That will generate someplace in the neighborhood of $500,000 to $700,000 of incremental revenue to cover increases in expenses without anybody doing anything based upon the existing mill rate. So that's the other part of the calculation, which we didn't include last year because we had a rebound. This year, we're going to include how that's helping fund what the requests were by the various boards. We're breaking it down so people can understand how this really works. So my first question is, with guidance having been given at 3% to all the boards, how do people feel about a 3.4% increase in the Board of Ed operating? And I'm just gonna start with Stacy.
I knew it was coming over here, I was trying to.
I know he would.
I was like over here.
Because she was putting her eyes down, and that's the first thing that somebody looks at. So, yeah, we'll just go around, and if you have no opinion, that's fine too.
I mean, I think there are some things that we can look at and we can ask for more information on. You know, athletics is always my thing that I'm always asking questions about, and I think that we talked a little bit today, Jack, and I talked to Beth today. Beth's been following the Board of Ed budget for a while, so she feels similar. I'm speaking for you, sorry. I know she's
accurate.
Yes, so I think that's something that I still don't have a clear understanding of, but I mean, there's like, what is there to argue about is sort of what I'm feeling about 3.46. I mean, unless you can come up with more of your wonderful accounting skills, like I said in my email to you,
Oh, I have some,
good, then,
but I'll go last.
good, then you can find it and suggest the, like you're talking about with the subscriptions. I mean,
Okay, fair. Do you have an opinion, Brett? We're going around that way.
I really hate to agree with Stacy. It pains me. But I would just rephrase in different words essentially what she just said. So I'm sure there's some things to pick on, but I think it's sort of, at this point it would be picking, and I haven't got into enough detail to identify those things. So as a general feeling, I'm pretty much where Stacy just articulated.
Barrett?
Nothing at the moment.
Bill?
Listen, we need to spend some time looking at each of the items.
Beth?
Yeah, I mean, I really looked over this budget a great deal, and I kept thinking that somewhere there was going to be like the magic unicorn that I could find that would be, but honestly, a lot of the things, he arrived at this 3.46 number by cutting things that I was sort of like,
yeah.
whoa, practically half the admin support at the high school gone, and he's cut a lot of FTEs without cutting teachers, which I thought was pretty impressive in a way. So I just can't get any, like I can't get my hooks into anything.
I will warn all of us, because we all have our favorite little bugaboos of what we would like to see.
I mentioned mine.
Yeah. What we would like to see of what he did not add to this budget,
Oh, yeah.
possibly be in the budget, but that's not really our job.
Can I just say that I really appreciated that part of the presentation where he showed, yes, where he cut a lot of FTEs and where he showed what people asked for and what he didn't put in. For a few reasons, I appreciated that. One, because I've heard from people that when big things do come, like psychologists last year, or when Fitch came, I didn't know we had these pockets of kids. This came out of nowhere. So I think it's nice to sort of just let us know where the staff is thinking. The other part that I enjoyed about it is it changed the dialogue of Super Saturday. It made the department heads have a little more skin in the game, and they were. I watched them advocate a little more, and the dialogue was different. It also gave the Board of Ed some flexibility to have some conversations. I really appreciated that part of his presentation, so I just wanted to put that out there.
And he won on all of them that he wanted to not put into the budget.
So far,
Which answered your question.
being relatively new to this budget process, I was, again, we're talking shades of gray on pretty small amounts here and there. The one that jumped out at me was the healthcare costs. And like, I go to a bigger picture of a much bigger problem to solve. But I appreciated all the work that everyone did on that, and I agree with you that the dialogue was really thoughtful on the part of the Board of Ed Commission. I don't have anything that jumps out at me, so I don't think I can add anything. I think it's your kids and your schools, right? And
No, you're getting into that other mood.
I'm fine for now.
Martha, help me here.
Well, I thought the superintendent did a good job trying to control the budget. I mean, he clearly worked at it.
Yeah.
He took out secretaries, and I hope the Board of Ed will support him on that. I can always come up with a few questions. This one's small, but if you look at the technology numbers, that's RC15 for the replacement Chromebooks and the iPads. I went back and I looked at the enrollment versus the numbers they're using, and I can see the need to buy a few extras, although I think if something breaks, you can get it relatively fast. But, do you have to buy 10% extra? And in one case, I'll have to go there. The third and fourth grade Chromebooks, they're getting 950. The students in the third and fourth grade for next year are 713. Do we really, that's a question of.
That's a good question.
Katie Stein asked that, right? She said go back and look at that.
Yeah.
I didn't hear that.
Yeah, but
Okay.
some of the stuff, we try not to ask for the same things that they're talking about, but we're going to support by saying, we understand the board has asked for this, we would like this extra. And that's more for Beth than Peter when they're writing this.
And budget control, I understand that there are 4 sections on the edge. But do we really have to assume that all 4 are going to turn? And I think somebody made a very good point at the meeting. The Board of Finance supports the Board of Ed. So if we only budgeted for 2, but lo and behold, we needed 3, I would have no concern
See,
that the Board of
I
Finance,
fully disagree with you.
well, that's my opinion anyway.
Yeah, no, that's why I said to John when he said that, the Board of Finance would say to the Board of Ed, which they did recently, within the last 3 years, go find it and then come back and, at the end of the year, if you don't have it, then talk to me.
But I will point
That's what I
out,
was saying.
there's been a lot of money returned over the last few years.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, that's one thought I had. Should you really budget for the worst case scenario? I think personally the Board of Finance would fund it, but,
I'm also willing, if we cut the Board of Ed's $400,000, that would cut the Board of Finance's $400,000 that they're sitting on a $25 million budget on.
anyway, and then, in the finance area, the fellow is asking for a transportation coordinator. I don't know, I'd have to hear more of a case for that. That's $73,000. And my only other thing, and this is a nit, really, but utilities and heating oil. And somebody did ask, could we please break out heating
I
oil
did.
separately from natural gas?
Because I know that's one of your bugaboos.
But I also say, I looked back, and we've spent a significant amount of money over the last few years on energy conservation projects, LED conversions, light dimming systems, solar panels. And yet I looked, the electricity price has steadily gone up. Now, rates have increased, but I would like to see an accounting in terms of, let's say, KWH consumption, because I'd like to see, are these projects that we continually fund, are they paying off for us. Are they paying off over 5 years, or are they paying off over 15? So I think we should see consumption, where the dollars were spent, at what time period, and then just so we can track it and benchmark. This doesn't really relate specifically to the budget, but you just see dollar figures. And as I said, we spend a lot of money, and I have no idea if it's panning out in a big way or a little way.
I think, I fully agree with you, because as Stacy reminded me, one of my favorite lines are, things that get measured get managed.
Yeah. And I mean, this would go for the town side too.
Yeah, no, I fully understand. But the town, if I recall, with the deal that they did on, I'm looking at Mark because you may remember the numbers better, but I thought they were paying like 7.9 on the solar with the deal that they cut.
I think it was, I don't remember exactly. It was
Yeah,
that ballpark.
and they're paying about 9, which is why I said, I know this is contingent on getting 2 roofs done, but one of these roofs were approved 2 years ago. Are we moving forward with the solar panel on the schools once we put the roofs on? Because I'd like to have the 7.9 versus the 9.2 that they're spending.
Particularly if electricity usage is going to go up now that they've put in all those air conditioners.
Well, that was one of the questions, because they said it was air conditioning, but the air conditioners didn't go in until April. So it shouldn't have been that significant, and it wasn't the amount that it was when you found out what the kilowatt hours that they were supposed to be using and the amount of time they were supposed to run, and you calculated out what it is, which is one of the things we asked Lynch to do. It wasn't this increase. I think the increase that they alluded to, but again, because they're not doing certain measurements, and I don't know how they can, was that these Chromebooks and iPads have increased the amount that's being charged. So again, I'd like to see some, and again, and Mark, I'm with you. What does it take to charge one of these things? How many do you got in the school? What? This isn't accounting for this type of increase. So those are some of the things that we'd like to have a little bit more information on. I have no problem asking for that.
Jack, on the LED project, I think Ed did report back to the RTM, or at least the Public Works, and I think Mark, he said it's on track for a 3-year payback or 2.5 or something like that.
He's very good about that.
85,000 of annual savings.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's on the streetlights.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that was, I think our payback was actually even quicker than what we
2.5 or
anticipated.
2.5, 3 years.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
he's very thoughtful. With the generator, originally was going to be gas, but then he decided diesel makes more sense. I mean, he analyzes everything very carefully.
Yes, but I would like to get some of that analysis, similar type of analysis and follow-up, a little more from the Board of Ed, as what we've been spoiled with from Ed. So.
To your point, that's the only way you're gonna be able to tell if these energy efficiency initiatives have
Right,
made any difference.
and we really have spent a considerable sum.
Right.
Yeah, I know, I
And
think,
sometimes, if your payback is 15 years, it probably doesn't make sense. Wait a few years for another technology to come along.
that was part of the problem, and again, I'll relate it anecdotally to we had the energy audit done, which I recommend everybody, if you haven't, you should do for $150. But the single pane windows that we have in our downstairs play den, which has been there since the 1950s, when they gave us what the payback was for putting in new windows, it was like 20 years. So the single pane is staying. Mark?
I'm new to this. What caught my eye, I saw 2 headlines. I saw the increase, obviously, but then the FTE reductions, I thought that was a lot was done there. Someone mentioned no teacher reductions, but am I misunderstanding? There were 2.
Those,
Net.
that teacher reduction, because I quantified this non-publicly, but went up to Dr. Adley. If you recall, when we were talking about the teacher contract, we said that there was, I thought it was about 260,000. It ends up that it was based upon what was actually being paid this year. It's 204,000 was being paid for those teachers that were already teaching 5 courses. And so since now everybody has to teach 5 courses, we're getting back some FTEs on that, and the savings is 204,000.
And so I still have trouble with how those FTE reductions don't manifest in some sort of a flat line impact to the salary. It's me new to this process. I'm not getting it.
Well, that's one of the questions I'm gonna be, when I get to need some of the information that I would like.
Just being new, I was expecting there to be a flat or maybe even a dip on the salaries. I just like the increases. I just don't understand how that works, but it's.
Well, I find it interesting because remember, there's the teachers have on average a 3% increase, although the top tier, which is going to represent about either 28 or 32% of our teaching staff, are only getting 1.5. The administrators are getting a 2.5, and yet when you look at the salary increase that was presented by Dr. Adley, the increase is only at 1.7.
So I rationalize in my head, that's why.
And I'm looking saying, how?
Mhm.
So that's one of the things that I'd like a little more detail on.
That's where I was coming from. Just
Yeah.
I ballpark is that, okay, it sort of makes sense, but
Yeah, but let's have some, now, they also did something in this contract that the town has done for years, but the Board of Ed hasn't. During contract negotiations, the town will put in an accrual for what they anticipate they might pay out once the contract is done, and they put in a number. So they put that in, there's some in this year's budget, and that came over by way of a transfer. There's some in next year's budget, over 300,000. I have 2 things on that. Number one, the town is smart enough that when they calculate this, it ends up with zeros at the end. You do not need to have it at $537. It should be, if it's 343 and 500, make it $344,000 round. So that's my first thing. It's just, let's keep these numbers round on that. And there's 3 contracts that they're going to be looking at. The second thing is, rather than, if that money isn't totally spent this year, rather than it being included in the return to the general fund, they should be doing the same thing, and this is one of the things that we spoke to Kate when Kate was here about. We should be moving that money to the balance sheet, so that when it does come in, if there's a lag or something, it's taking more, it's there, or it's there for future contracts. We'll take the expense this year, but then it doesn't go in the general fund. It goes to the balance sheet the same way the town puts their excess funds on the balance sheet. So there's consistency in our accounting for this type. So that's something that we're going to have to have, which I encourage them to have really early conversations with the Board of Finance on. And we may have to have similar ones. Yep.
So I was very impressed with Dr. Evans. I'm glad I went the night before, the Tuesday night before, because I thought that it was wonderful to see his control of the board and the room and the people. And Martha made a comment to me earlier today that I thought about after you said it, about the fact that he was more willing to give up what he felt he could be given up than his team was. And they seem to like not even agree with him about it. And I think that that's because he's genuinely looking at it new, and they aren't. That they're looking at, well, this has always been here, it always needs to be here, it always will be here. And he just took a clean slate and put up what he needed. So I was really impressed with him, and the whole process. I had two questions that I sat through that I wasn't sure about. One was if we asked him to take the list of things on page 20 that were not included, are they in priority order, or what would that be?
Yes, I thought that was a good question.
And I'd like to know what that priority order would be, because I'd love to know from a priority standpoint. I assume that they're in priority order, because I would put them in priority order if I was putting them down, but they're maybe not. And it would be good to know that. And then what costs were associated to them if they, there were costs associated to them. Because honestly, if there's a balance sheet reserve, maybe, some of this stuff is not a big deal. I don't know if K1 is his most important thing, but if K1 displays are his most important thing and it's a minimal amount of money, maybe he's got a way to do that. So I just wanted to see that. And the second thing was that there's a process that they don't do which would have driven any boss I ever had crazy in the budgeting process, because somebody made a comment about them not turning in their expenses or their or their whatever for months and
Dr.
months.
De Silva mentioned saying,
Man,
"No, they
I
don't
would
come in."
if I had a boss that had heard that, they would have gone through the roof. So the comment was just that their expenses lagged by months and quarters and all sorts of things that people don't turn them in by. And it's like, how can that be? I mean, that's just insane. And so there has to be some accounting.
Just stop paying it.
No, well,
I don't get it in there on time.
They all accepted it.
No, I will tell you that, now, when I was traveling overseas, I had a certain amount of time, and if I was, gone for 4 weeks, they didn't give her care, I had another word I was gonna use, but I could be in Australia and I have to be submitting expenses over there.
Everywhere.
Because
Any place in the
they
world.
don't want to see
Any
a
place except for the Board of
$10,000 bill
Education.
all of a sudden come in. And even though I was controlling my own travel, the fact of the matter is that we're submitting them online and we're going from there. Even on other companies where you have contributors where the expenses aren't there, I know many companies have policies that if they're not handed in within 30 days or 45 days, you ain't getting it.
That's your own.
And so
Somebody
I
has
think that's a good policy that we can
do
suggest.
some sort of something, because there were line items, like, I wrote two of them to Beth and Peter, but there were line items where they were off by $85,000 or something, and they looked at it and said, oh, it's coming, we just haven't put it through. And I went, really? You got $85,000 of slack that you haven't put through, whatever the line item was? I think it was consulting or something. It was really bad.
No, it was travel, because they sometimes, if somebody's traveling between schools, they get $7, and it's only $7 and that, and.
So they wait up and submit it all at once.
Yeah, but there has to be a monthly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree that that's a very good recommendation that we could make along those lines, if nothing else from an accounting perspective.
Well, to Bert's point, want to see what happens. You can't.
But-
Yeah.
But some of the things that we're talking about is consistent with, and you mentioned it again, on how Dr. Adley looked at this, is that,
He's tight.
we've done certain things for years.
Yeah, he's good.
And, we haven't looked at this back on what we did 10 years ago, and so it's still on the books, on the town side. And those are the things where our pair of eyes and the new look, or having a new superintendent who's rather experienced coming in is helpful. So I agree with what you said.
He was great.
Yeah. And I wasn't sure, Stacy, had you also asked for the prioritization in either our afternoon conversation or that? I thought you also asked that those things be prioritized.
Well, I've asked in past budgets, like, how did you decide this over that? How do you prioritize your goals? I've asked that in the past, but no, not today.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question.
I do
to
too.
ask.
It was the stuff not included really that.
Yeah.
First of all, it's really great to have confidence in not only the leadership, but to know that this leadership looks like it's going to stay.
Yeah.
We had more superintendents than many British soccer clubs coaches, you know. And what they do, they start out by spending money. And this one really, you know, is trying to cut out some staff. It's unbelievable.
Without
okay?
affecting programs.
So that was very
Yeah.
interesting.
No, adding.
Okay, I sent
That's my takeaway.
I sent Jack some stuff, and I did not go into a lot of the details because Michael and Martha's husband and I on a book club, and we're reading Thank You for Being Late by Thomas Friedman. And we are late. We will be the last one to look at the budget, and there will be many changes, I am sure. This will not be 3.49, which will be the headline on the Darien Times this week. This will be changed.
But I want these questions in on the 21st, no later than the 21st. So we need what these are by the 14th so that Beth and Peter can play with this.
So I gave Jack some of the questions that really are what we discussed right now, especially on, you know, teacher contract efficiencies. We need more breakdown on that. And on the health benefits, you know, why do we have 3 different plans within one town? One for the library, one for the school, and one for the town. Maybe we can pool some of the stuff. I'm a great supporter of pooled investments, and I'm a great supporter of pooled anything because you have economies of scale. Having looked at this,
I do have to separate.
Okay, so having looked at the, one thing I want you to remember, when you look at the 3.46 and you break it down, a substantial part of that, 1.27% of that, is health benefits and pension. Without those, the budget would be 2.19% going up. This is before all these other things that I expect to happen. Now, do the pensions bother me? Well, they lowered the crediting rate from 3.9 to 3.5, a reasonable thing, but that's not going to be done every year. That's going to be a one-time thing, I think. The health benefits is very hard to swallow, but I also think eventually we're going to run out of these healthcare increases that we see every year, which in my view are the product of the ACA, which set these rates too low, and everyone was trying to get in at that time. And since then, we have tried to catch up. Eventually, these things will level out, or we are all lucky and have Elizabeth Warren to give us socialized medicine. Anyway, these things are not every year, okay? We have to keep that in mind, because if you took those away, that are really of nobody's doing inside the administration, it's 2.19, you gotta give them credit, okay? And as far as the individual things are concerned, I think, yeah, Jack wants to have some more input, I guess, right?
I do want to comment on healthcare because it has been discussed in the joint grouping for some time. The library broke away from the town because they were under the town side, because the town experience rate and their age and everything was killing the library. And the population of the library is more similar to the schools, but they couldn't join the school one. And so they went out on their own, and their increase is not the same. What we've experienced, we've had very good experience rates where our increase in healthcare has been about 4% or things like that, and constantly going out to bid and then joining prescription and things like that. We've been pretty good at the school. Unfortunately, sometimes it's based upon experience rate. And I don't know the exact number, but I believe it was mentioned someplace. We've had about 20 individuals.
22, between 100 and 200.
Yeah, that have had some significant health issues this year that has absolutely destroyed our experience rate. So, and in fact, our current provider has lost money on us. So that's part of the reason why they put it so high, so we could say goodbye. So this is potentially an outlier year where we would hope that our experience rate would come back down. But every time, and from what I understand allegedly, I can say because I haven't seen the analysis, but when the school looked to join the town employees that are significantly older, all right? Remember, we have cafeteria workers that are been around for 30, 40 years and are still working well beyond their Social Security years. When we added a lot of our town employees to the younger teaching professional staff that we had, it significantly increased the school's expenses, even though it brought down the town's, and the net of the two was not beneficial to taxpayers. So, yes, while it may make sense, we just happen to have a year that unfortunately we have 22 people that are experiencing some very bad health issues. And we would prefer that they get healthy for a whole bunch of reasons.
Just one other point, aside from the 22 with the high cost currently, I think there's also a move earlier this year by the Board of Ed to encourage retirements. And if that is in fact going to be the case, perhaps demographically, the average age of the teacher will drop. It might have an attendant favorable impact on healthcare costs and mitigate the other costs.
Right. I think that some of these costs also, and I'm not sure, that some of them may be some of the retirees and the spouses of some of our members that have created. So, yes, we had a retirement, but we still had some of these that just happened to happen. So it just, I do remember one year when we were talking about long-term substitutes, one of the elementary schools had probably 20% of their younger teachers on maternity.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes this stuff happens, and we can't do much about it, But
Do any of the towns have age limits set for employees?
some night, we don't. And
Do we know, though we should know, maybe?
I don't know that that's something that when I'm
Age
getting.
limits on employees?
Well, I'm just saying, he said well past Social Security. So if
Mandatory retirement.
mandatory retirement
I
age.
don't think that's allowable these days.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was maybe true of my father's generation, but I don't think that's.
I'm just-
And
Except for things like pilots and such.
but also if you're looking at things
Fire
like,
department, police department, you don't think it's level?
but
That makes sense.
but when you're looking at some of our cafeteria workers, they know everyone's family there and all these kids, and it really is a benefit when some of these kids are going through, because they remember that your older brother had a peanut allergy. Do you have that allergy, or what's going on here, or you can't have that? And so it's not a disadvantage to have some of these people here, working longer into their life, but.
I was more talking about fire and police than it was cafeteria people.
check your tickets on the car.
There's a boot on your car, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, again, I'm new to this and I was out of town Saturday, but what I was confused again, it was with the, which you clarified in the reduction in excess cost, because it was very convoluted the way that they presented.
I will.
19 reimbursements
when
from
it's-
9
when-
H-out students, so,
When I get to my turn, I'll explain excess costs.
yes, because it was a little bit convoluted, but it's pretty, yeah, it's talking about 0.34 plus the pension, which also surprised me, because it's 0.90% increase. When we are really looking at these pensions that have been adjusting, so that those were two of my comments. The other one is about we fix the oil price, but it's not clear which one is the gas, and it's like, okay, so how is helpful?
Or whether or not, if we're looking at what the usage is by month,
Breakdown.
by each of these schools, there's several schools that we've put in new boilers. I would hope that they're operating more efficiently, since it's the same temperature for all the
Big program.
schools, for that.
Digitized controls.
And I will tell you something that I raised 5 years ago unsuccessfully, was from somebody that I know that does this. We have, and part of it has to do with the room that we have, we put in 2 large boilers. What new buildings might have is 4 boilers. And so they smaller, and they alternate what's going on, because sometimes when we're running 2 boilers, we might only need really 3 smaller boilers, and that's how they're catching efficiency on what's going on. In some of our older schools, we can't do that, but it's something to consider in Ox Ridge, even on the gas side.
The other thing that we mentioned, but it seems that the transfer money always goes to consultants. Probably there is more of a headline that they put like the several breakdowns to avoid that we are paying consultants, but we are allocating money from supplies, or it is to just more quiet. And it's 7,000 just for the summer and 75,000 strategic. And
That was a new plan that wasn't in the budget previously, that they're doing, that Hadley brought in to create a strategic plan. That's why that was transferred there. And he found other places that he could take it from.
okay. And the last also that the legal fees. And again, it's the headline before that the litigation, the town, etc. So we're still going on. It's pretty 300,000 or 290,000.
We had an increase in the fees, I believe. Stacy, do you recall what the?
Sorry.
I was trying to look at Mike Burke's face when, he's an attorney. When Richard said what the legal fees were, but I think he said they range from 10 to 20%.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that was right.
So that's part of the reason.
Yeah, Shipman raised their fees. is part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. We have less FOIA than we had. But that doesn't mean, and legal fees are in certain places. You have legal fees for the general administration and things that we have to comply with that. But then you also have legal fees in special ed, because there are certain things that are done in accordance with IEPs and whether or not things are challenged and things like that. But I thought, did legal fees go up?
It was 290,000 with a negative variance of 30,000.
Okay.
They still have an administrator contract to do this year, and
Yes.
they're still settling. They're settling.
They have 3 contracts.
Yeah, they're settling 3 other contracts right now. So
They have administrators this year, then they have the nurses,
Yeah.
the aides, and
cafeteria.
Yeah.
cafeteria. So that would include why legal fees go up, because we use the labor attorney.
Of course, you did have the teacher's contract that was negotiated this year, which I imagine, creates a lot of legal fee.
Yeah, yes,
Versus the nurses.
where there's 20, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have we ever gotten like a breakdown of what the legal fees are going for? Like how much of it was FOIA related versus contract
Last year we did.
negotiations?
Yes, we
we
did
got
get that last year. If you want, we can add it to the list of information that we're requesting this year.
There we go.
Since you're writing it, you can,
I'll put that in.
Bob?
Yes. 4 things quickly. I would agree with Martha's comment about technology. It felt like that was almost as good of a job, and I would agree with everyone, that the superintendent did a great job. It felt like that was a little bit of a soft spot on him, where he kind of let the technology guys run with it, more so than he did with the rest of his staff. It's a head scratcher to me for the high schoolers why they all need iPads. Most of those students, I'm fairly certain, have their own equipment. And in fact, the technology people could only tell us usage on users, not on equipment. So if you can't even tell me how much of the equipment you're using, why do you need the equipment? So they could be users on their own equipment, I guess is my point.
That was one of the things that I think the board did raise on whether or not how you do an opt-in or an opt-out. You still may need to have some extras around because
Totally agree.
if my sons were here, I would find the iPads at home more times than not.
Yeah.
But, so,
So that's one point, and I just think
but I
he
do
needs to
think
tighten that
that
up a
your
little.
numbers are
Well, just-
interesting numbers.
Well, just look, I mean, double
Yeah.
check me, I mean, but.
Yeah, no,
you know,
but we can say that that's,
You know, how
that's
much
good.
extra is required, I guess.
right, they were talking
Particularly
though,
for 3rd and 4th graders, because they keep those computers at school. They're not hauling them back and
No.
forth the way
Right.
the older kids are.
Yeah, I think the high schoolers is more where there's wood to chop.
well, I also think that some of the technology went up, which is why the reason that you can put this in, because this is one of the things I want to talk about, is, you know, I mentioned it during the session, but I'd like to see a revised rollout plan based upon, I believe they were saying, one of the platforms that they 11th and 12th graders have does not support the crayon.
They have
The
older
iPads,
generation
the
iPads,
iPads,
and the
yeah.
iPads don't support the crayon
Right.
that the 9th graders have in their
Right.
newer
Right.
iPads.
Now, I hate to admit this, but I have no idea what the crayon is, so somebody can explain that to me later. Yeah, that's what
I will
thought.
bring one in and show you, because
So
my
it's-
9th
it's-
grader has
stylus.
accumulated
Right.
3 crayons
So it's the
somehow.
stylus that we used to have on the other things that they now just call a crayon.
Yes.
Okay, fine. I got it.
It's like a Palm Pilot thing.
Yeah, I got it, I got it. All right.
Palm Pilot, really?
Wow. That next to your advocates at home, is that?
That's so you don't feel bad. That was the first thing I thought about.
So, second one is on health. And Bert, you're probably right, this is momentary, but I've noticed that colleges, particularly in New England, are starting to pool together their insurance. Has the Board of Ed considered doing that? So pool with New Canaan, because that will smooth out your problem with the 22 individuals. Because the larger pool you get, the less spikes in theory, you should see.
I believe that he said
Yeah.
Oh, we did?
that
Yeah,
he was
they
looking
just-
at a consortium, but not just in Fairfield County, but around the state, which he has some contacts on.
Yeah.
Because they did look at the state fund, but that wasn't necessarily working, although that's the fallback, if it isn't. But they are looking to have a consortium to create one and then go to, I think it was either Anthem or somebody else, and come
And
in.
Sigma, I think.
Yeah, it was one of the
And he
two.
realizes he's disadvantaged.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Just,
How to do it,
he's
right?
really looking at controlling costs. I mean,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, he's taking some initiative here.
and I don't know, and I have nothing to base this on, but based upon his position, as the chair of the superintendents for the state and him coming from upstate, I tend to believe that he has a little bit broader reach with other school superintendents and other things than we might have had previously.
And perspective.
Yes, very good, yes.
And can pick up the phone and ask the question.
And have people answer on the other side.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yes, I would agree with that on what you said.
Next one is just on utilities, and this was mentioned prior, but I think it would be helpful for all parties involved, is a study a little bit more complex than what you get from Eversource once a month, which says that I use more energy than my neighbor. Which I still haven't figured out how that's the case. But even, kilowatt usage per person, per student, per square foot, and are there best practices out there?
Yeah.
Because I don't get a sense that we have that information. And then lastly, it just seems like there's an awful lot of consultant lines in the expenses.
Ask,
And that's an easy dish,
I
right?
just
Give it to
want
the
us
consultant,
to.
my buddy, who I'm gonna work for when I retire.
I want us to separate out, because there's two types of consultants in this budget. We have educational consultants, and it's one of the ongoing conversations that I've had with members of the Board of Finance, that, we want to control our FTEs, but on the same token, if we could get an OT or a PT on board versus paying the consultant, the cost is actually less.
Is that like a 1099 versus a W-2 employee?
Yeah. The problem is that we can't get the OTs to join the school district because they make a lot more money servicing 5 school districts. So if we're talking on the education side, that's one thing. If we're talking about consultants to help on other side, that's worthy of question.
Okay, yep,
All right.
okay. Those are my 4.
I'm looking at some of my special ed folks.
Yeah, well, and some of the things are, like, some of the needs of some of the children are very specific, and it may not be worth hiring a staff member for some of the very specific needs of a children. And they actually, they write it out in RC 24, what some of those specific skill sets and therapies are that those kids need. So, and then I thought some of the consultants was sort of like professional development stuff too. So.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but in RC 16, there's a big number which is administrative. I think that's where I picked it up.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
There's a big number in administrative. It's like, $70,000 more than last year, or more than.
Is that the strategic or?
Just says consulting services.
Okay, we.
Operating included
Not
in that
strategic,
was
it's
a
operating.
demography, a demography report, which I couldn't understand. Is that on top of the Malone and McBroom?
I
didn't understand that.
The best way to deal with that is let's put it on our list to request information.
Yeah, that'd be helpful for me.
Yeah.
Because that's part of what this is to give our overall view on this, but the other part is what additional information would we like to get? So,
Well, without the benefit of having attended the Saturday meeting, but with the benefit of everybody's comments tonight, which I think find very heartening about the impressions of the superintendent's presentation and his engagement with both his staff and overall with dealing with a new situation like this and taking some proactive measures. The skepticism I originally had about when I heard the increase was, while the increase was maybe less than I was kind of thinking it would be, it still seemed a bit high. But again, informed by all the comments tonight, I think the one thing, the takeaway I have, kind of just picking up what you did, really is to focus on one of the 3 drivers that you mentioned, Jack, at the onset of this, which is the excess cost reimbursement, kind of relating to what Bert had said as well, is that excess cost reimbursement last go-around was a significant driver in terms of what the payback was to the town by the Board of Ed. It was largely driven by, I guess, students that were missed, not counted in the original budget. So my takeaway is I want to focus on the excess cost reimbursement, the assumptions going into this year, being that it's one of the three drivers. And that's the best I can do right now in terms of just giving you my sense.
Thanks.
So, I have a little longer list.
So.
Whoa, 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 whoa,
I'm sorry.
Last but not least.
My fault.
Don't make her mad, please.
Whoa.
Your list is not long.
You might not get out alive.
Mine is really quick and dirty.
Does she still have her?
No,
She's good. She
great.
drove me
No boot?
tonight.
All right, I'm leaving now.
Good move.
I think I said this last year, and I'll say it again, and I'm going back to the top level of your question. We are, this 3.46 is case of 0.46, maybe it's not a huge number, but they were asked for a 3% budget. They should come to a 3% budget. That's really huge, because last year they had a 2%. This is a whole, so I also think that if you, looking even for these small amounts inspires a diligence into looking and managing your numbers. And mayhap you will do the analysis that will show you that you can better manage some of these numbers if you get rid of that 0.46%. So I think that they were given a 3% and they should come in at 3%. So and I think that that 0.46 can be found easily. So we are big picture, even though we all have specific questions and thoughts, and I think all of our comments have been helpful, and I'm glad to hear that our superintendent is doing the job that he's being paid for. That's great. But we still you have to manage it from a top level, and you need to go down and you need to hold the line. We spend a lot of money on our schools, and we get really good products out of our schools, so I think we don't have to, and every time you have a little slippage, you have a little more slippage, and a little more slippage, and so you need to you say 3% is what the Board of Finance wants, then that's what they should come in. There you go. Now, Jack, please continue.
To say what Brad said, I really hate to agree with Iris. I'm not too far off of there. I do think that maybe 3% is a little bit more difficult because 0.34% of that is done by something that they have no control over. And that's an effect on their budget. But I don't think it brings it to 3.34%. I think that you need to look at 3.34 and say, you gotta find at least half of that elsewhere in your budget.
I think if you look at the 2% last year,
Yeah.
at least half of that was uncontrollable too. So
Yeah.
you can't just say, oh, half of it was uncontrollable, because half of it's always uncontrollable.
Right.
So, so you have to, you have to go look at
I want it closer to 3. I mean, I can understand part of this because of the pension and that, but I want it closer to 3. So, how do you get there? Couple things. And I understand the superintendent's only had essentially 4 months to come in, and he's managing somebody else's budget. All right? And already he decided to reorganize certain positions by taking out certain secretaries or moving things or making movements around to accommodate that, and is looking to see where he needs aides and where he doesn't, and other things like that. I was gobsmacked to see a reduction essentially of 7 or 8 positions, which is really good. But here's a challenge. I understand, and let's see if I use this word properly. There were various times during the meeting that I thought he was getting a little testy, because he did not like some of the questions like adding things back in or challenging some of the other things, because he, as the head, made a decision on what was necessary in this budget without changing the promises or the deliverables for the students. And he stated that on a number of occasions. So when everybody had their favorite thing, well, we need the ELL, or we need these whiteboards, or we need this, he bristled a little bit at certain times during that meeting, or at least that was my take. So that being said, and I can't expect it in 4 months, but maybe it's for next year, I'm not sure that some of the things that we've promised need to be complied with. Sometimes it's in athletics. When you have in a freshman, I'm going to pick on something, my daughter went to it, I apologize. Lisa, I'm not going after you. But on girls lacrosse, when you have 30 freshman kids playing, and there's only 10 kids on that field, and the games are 40 minutes, how much playing time are we really doing, and how many coaches do we really need to service that? Although that's really only a $2,000 stipend adjustment, all right? I think that one of the things that we asked for last year that was not provided this year was there was some things on athletics. I can ask you, Stacy, if you don't mind. Oh, what are the parents paying? That was on some of these sports like hockey and other things like that, which was agreed to, and in all fairness, Tara did raise something that Krista would raise on an annual basis. What are the parents paying on these sports also to decide? I went to school on a wrestling scholarship, so my heart loves wrestling. That being said, when you only have 7 or 8 kids in it, the question is, what is the cost to potentially hook up with another school, and what the busing cost would be to bring them there, or other things like that, and maybe take back some other schools' kids and do some joint teams, which is what not St. Joe's, Trinity is currently doing in that, when you don't have enough people to really make the team go and the numbers go out. So those are things that I'd like them to explore. I don't know that you can do it in this budget cycle because it's really quick, but it's something that was mentioned. I'd like a listing from Dr. De Silva before she leaves on what's the list of subscriptions, when did we buy them, what did we pay, either upfront or on an annual basis, and when do they expire? Because she mentioned, well, I'm deciding between 3 years or 6 years. Well, how many other of these things do we got floating out there? Somebody asked for clubs and councils on the high school. Standard practice is, why don't we get it on everyone?
And parents pay something into the clubs and councils at the high school, yes, Beth? No, Beth? No? No? Okay.
No, we took away pay to play a number of years ago.
Except for athletics, where we still.
Yeah, I've been there. So, the next thing that goes with clubs and councils, since we haven't gotten in enough trouble yet as F&D,
That's right.
is I'd like to have a better understanding of what's going on with the student funds.
Yeah.
I'd like to have an accounting for it. I'd like to know what's flowing in and out.
Yep.
I'd like to know where those bank accounts are.
Yep.
Now, we have very good policy on it, and I understand that it sounds like Dr. Adley and Rich are looking to take some control of that. But, I mean, are we talking about $5,000 funds, or are we talking about schools that are sitting there with $20,000, $30,000? I mean, if we're talking about receipts from basketball and football, these aren't $5,000 funds. So let's understand what's there and have some understanding on that. Don't mean to suggest this, but with Dr. De Silva leaving, are we anticipating paying the same amount for her replacement? She's been here for a number of years. Just curious, but, you know, that one might be better said,
We might be paying more.
yeah, that one might be better said offline, but it's a question nonetheless, even though I just made it on.
I think we're I would add that same scrutiny you talked about on subscriptions to consultant services, and when was the last time you called the consultant and tried to renegotiate?
Add that on.
You'll get 10% out of that.
We did add, but we should be consistent, because it was a question that we did during the session. We have $14,000 on air conditioner repairs. My response is, really? First, didn't we just purchase these? And after a while, if that's what we're paying on some of these buildings for air conditioning, it doesn't cost that much to buy a new unit. So what's the cost benefit of replacing some of these instead of paying for that? Or whether or not, or trying to have an understanding how much of that is maintenance contracts and how much of that is real repairs. There's a couple other maintenance accounts that look a bit higher. I think painting was one of them. I mentioned the curriculum. My biggest bugaboo that I raised. I understand that you have bubbles that move through an elementary school. So there may be 4 sections in grade 2. Next year, the 4 sections go to grade 3. But when I looked at the addition of the cost for the teacher in moving that section from one to another, it was significantly higher than the reduction in the prior grade. And so, like, we're moving a new teacher into, let's say, 3rd grade for $85,000, but if you look at the budget, it's a $50,000 reduction
In second grade.
in 2nd grade. My response is, huh? So I'd like a little bit more explanation on how those numbers came up. And again, it's not significant, but accruals for the union contracts, well, number one, I do believe they should be a round number, because it was kind of silly to see it down to $7 at the end of one of them. But also, I think it should start the conversation with the Board of Finance on whether or not these that are not spent go into the same balance sheet account that they do for the Board of Selectmen, and how that's controlled. Now, it does mean subsequently when funds come out of there, it's controlled by the Board of Finance, but I don't have a problem with that. I don't think it should just be going blanket into the, I'm putting in a budget this year for $300,000. I only used $100,000 of it. I'm returning $200 to the general fund, but next year, because I had to return that $200,000, I'm having in the following year to budget another $200,000 again, when really that shouldn't have happened. Let's see. Down significantly, is there a change in accounting from the town? On fixed costs, the expense for OPEB went down, and the income from OPEB went down, and I don't understand why. I think that's on RC 25. I'll give you the actual detail on that, but it was a significant decrease on the expense side and the revenue side. I just like a better explanation of why. I'm not questioning it, I'm not suggesting that it's budget, it's just I'd like to hear a little bit more from that. Our insurance rates are up. I understand that we've had a couple of accidents from some of our staff and their driving capabilities. It's something that I one time asked the town side to find out whether or not they couldn't increase their deductible and do some self-insuring on certain things, by moving it from $250 to $1,000, which many of us do until we have kids that are driving. But I understand we can't have a little more difficulty on the town side because our police vehicles can get a little banged up on occasion. So, but definitely that should be looked at. Do we need 2 trucks? Can we defer one of the trucks this year? Let's see. I mentioned Dr. De Silva's salary. I had a couple of others. I would like to have a breakdown of FTEs, and actually I'm going to be sending that over. I'll share the Excel spreadsheet with everyone. But part of what's difficult is when I'm looking at the salaries, it's hard to understand who belongs to what union. So when I'm doing certain comparisons, it's hard to know who's really certified staff. So I'd like them to give us FTEs by the various unions, what the current year budget and expenses, and what they're projecting for FTEs next year, and what the budget is. Because I think that's important. And by the way, then, we have to add in budget control, which is much higher than it was in the prior year. It's up by about $130,000, which is significant. We have to add in the pension because those are costs that they're anticipating that they're going to be paying. And I don't know whether or not that was included in the 1.6 or not. I mean, I'm trying to get back to the numbers because eventually we're going to have to explain this to the full RTM. So I'd like a little breakdown on that. In the spirit of Dave Lupiano, Rob Cordone, and Stacy and Brad, I'd like a little bit more understanding on the software of when we implemented it, what generation it is, when we're anticipating that it's going to be out of service. I mean, I've been told I got maybe another year on this, although I just love the size to it. And as such, we should understand the same thing so that we're not getting caught with all of a sudden some of the iPads that we have in the high school isn't supported by the Crayon. And I thought that what Jeff gave us was really a good analysis on the time. I'm just asking for the other information. One or two other things. There are a couple of expenses that I think we can look at. One that we mentioned that I explained to John Sinney and Mike Burke afterwards is based upon the analysis that we have done over the years. And that is, in the elementary schools, we have a lot of formula-driven expenses. So $76 for this times the number of students equals that, and then you can break it down between the various things, and $85 here, and we break that down by students and that. So rather than asking them to reevaluate whether or not those expenses are there, because in theory they said they looked at this, we have found in the past that there's been some flexibility in the operating budgets of the 5 elementary schools, the high school, and the middle school. And rather than going through the line items and saying, I think this one's too high, I'm not an educator, I'm not running that school. But perhaps we can suggest to the Board of Ed, that they consider going to the 5 elementary schools and say, we want $5,000. You guys come back and tell us where it's coming from. For the middle school and the high school, we want $10,000. They have more students, you know, they can get a bigger number. You tell us where it's coming from. You know, you're the principal, you tell us where you can find some money here. When we add that up, that's approximately $45,000. And I look at two things. First of all, I look at, compared to the 103, how does that change the increase? So if we were able to move the prepaid for 140, that's a 12 basis point decrease on the 3.46%, which brings it down to 3.34. Interesting enough, the same amount of what the OPEC is. But the other way that I look at things is, since our grand list is 8.4 billion, every time we come up with $84,000 of savings, that reduces the town's mill rate by 1 basis point. So that's the other way to say, that's why I typically don't look, even though it's good to say, hey, look, you moved 7,000. My own approach to this is I look at large numbers, unless again, I'm seeing something with a 20 to 30% increase. And then, you know, for me, I'm looking at where do I see increases of $30,000, $40,000, because then that will affect our mill rate a little bit easier than dealing with, you know, $10,000, $7,000 items. So it's just my approach, doesn't mean it's the only approach. Lastly, there were a couple of capital projects where we were waiting for final bills to be submitted in the October-November timeframe. Well, the October-November timeframe has passed. Those are not being closed out this year. We only close out capital once a year, which is typically in September. But in reality, that project's closed. So how much money, based upon the final accounting, is really sitting in those closed projects? And since the Board of Ed can suggest or ask for an approval, they can potentially move previously taxed money that's sitting in projects that will be closed next year and potentially transfer it to projects or capital items that they're requesting this year. That reduces their capital request. And the reason why I like that, even though it may be manipulating the policy of the Board of Finance, is that I don't like it going into a large contingency where it's not being returned to the taxpayers yet. And so that's all part of our, possibly the same way we did the reserve project, taking a look at the capital projects, working with Jen and the Board of Finance to come to some closure on that, and look to move some of that money around. And it would require an approval by the Board of Finance, but potentially, you know, if we can find $45,000, well, that pays for one of the trucks. All right, and so I know it's a little cheap, but I am. So those were some of my big things that I had, and you know, again, I think it's going to take some work, but I would like it to be closer to 3. Now, it's just because that was the guidance. I do understand that on the pension side, but healthcare, we've had healthcare increases before. You got to accommodate for that. So, oh, the other thing is, if this moves to 7% instead of 8.5, the increase from going, what's the financial impact of that? Usually we'll find out in March, but it seemed that Rich said that they should get some responses in a month, is what he was saying. So we may hear something there, but I'd just like to have a rough idea of what that 1% might do, so.
Hey, Jack, on that theme of finding small pockets, you touched on it indirectly, you're talking about clubs and also small teams and cost. Transportation is a bugaboo that I happen to have. And I couldn't tell where transportation, there's a big category, regular public pupil transportation, which I envision is to and from all the schools. But I know from my own business and moving my teams around, transportation can be very expensive. And is there any transparency? I welcome some transparency when the 8th grade has the free day at the beach at Pear Tree Point. What does it cost for that free day? Or when there's the Chelsea Pier Day, which the students pay for, but what is the cost to get those students those 6 miles or 4 miles to and from? And there's trips and things as well. I'm going to guess that there's a pretty good cost that maybe is not.
There's 2 costs there, and I actually
There's
asked.
insurance too.
Well, no, but there's 2 costs in the transportation, and I asked for some clarity on that. And this is someplace where, you don't want your accounting system to necessarily be a management system, but we pay for rental of cars, of buses, but we also pay a fuel cost. So I'm curious what I did ask, that's one of the things we have to ask. I asked what the heating oil cost was last year versus this year, and what the cubic foot cost on the gas was last year versus this year, to see if that had any increase. But the same thing was on the transportation. We pay, as part of the contract, we pay for the diesel fuel. I'd like to understand whether or not there was an increase on diesel fuel also, and that, but
This is the same theme.
I
I've
have
been
no
involved with,
problem.
not-for-profits that run camps.
Yeah.
And the camps do excursions occasionally, and it was mind-boggling how expensive it was to pack up all those kids and bring them for that free day at the beach in a camp context. And I know we do it I think we do it in the elementary schools, I know we do it in the middle schools. And
So can we maybe?
A lot of the elementary school stuff is paid for by the PTOs.
see, I don't know.
Yeah,
That's
it's
why
not,
the new
it's
guy's
not in
asking.
this budget.
Right.
It's the
And I didn't
PTOs
see it
pay
here.
for.
The PTOs pay for all the elementary school field trips.
Except for
Except for 2.
There's a 3rd grade field
And a
trip
second grade, because
field
they
trip.
do 3 trips and everybody else does 2.
Right.
So the school pays.
And that's
for those other
transportation.
2.
Summer camp.
So, and they fully cost it,
That's what I-
to your point?
So, yeah, my understanding is a lot of trips aren't paid for, and I
Yeah.
didn't see transportation. And so really I should have asked it, reframed it as a question, where is all that transportation?
There is
Right.
transportation in, I believe it's RC 20, is it 25?
I'm there now. I'm there
Yeah.
now. I see it.
Okay, but so let's reframe that question, because I think we can.
Right.
What is the cost for delivering students to their schools, broken out by that cost and the cost for fuel, one year to the other? And then what is the cost for other transportation associated with trips or other
Yeah,
things
but
like
that could be a
that?
big category, that could be athletics, I don't know. But you
Well,
could-
athletics has their own
That's what I'm saying.
That's
transportation.
in athletics.
So that's, okay.
And
So then it's everything
special
else.
ed has their out-of-district transportation.
Right.
So, but let's at
Yeah,
least in
thanks for
this
framing
name.
that.
And what amount is reimbursed? So to your free day at the beach that supposedly is paid for, is the full cost of transportation in there?
It's usually entirely covered by the PTOs.
Yeah.
Or it would, or.
But do they get, so they get charged for those buses and the insurance on those
It
buses?
now runs through, which
Okay.
it used to be directly from the PTOs, which was a very, very bad idea. It now runs through central office, but it's kind of a pass-through.
Got it, but they grab all the costs, so I guess is my
Yeah.
question.
Okay, okay. That'd be interesting.
So,
Thank you.
but for the other trips and transportation, let's at least
Yeah.
break what's going to deliver our students to the schools versus other transportation costs that may be in there, and a comparison year to year.
Because there was that, I don't know if you all got it, but I got an email from somebody who was referencing that they were going to shorten the length, the distance from the school that buses are involved.
That's Okay, yeah, that's different. So there is a dispute going on, and Tara sort of talked about it. They talked about it a little bit at the board table, that the high school has it for, if you attend the high school, the radius for if you receive a bus is 2 miles.
Right.
And if you're within the 2 miles, then you don't get a bus. And so, and then they have something happen this year with their computer or something, that they did something, and there was an there was a group that did get a bus, and then this new software changed the way they calculated it. Now they're 1.87 miles from the high school.
Right.
And so they're not getting a bus anymore. And they're walking, 1.87 miles, and they're walking up here.
Essentially,
Yes.
like
Yes.
right here.
Yes, they're walking
Here in
over.
the road and
Yes.
you're walking over 95.
Well, I will at least say
Yeah.
in theory,
Which is fine.
because
So they
there's a
were
lot
not,
of parents that drop off their kids even who have buses.
no, they're in mediation right now, Jack. They're in
Okay.
mediation
Okay.
right now. Tara said that at the meeting. They're in mediation.
Hence, that may be part of our
So-
legal fees.
Yes, so,
Actually.
yeah, well, that,
It's
yes.
gonna be more than fuel.
So they,
Is the calculation down correct?
More than a few.
so
So they got lucky for a few years?
I
So
think-
one of the things Rich said was if the Board of Ed chose to change the policy to 1.5 miles, and I don't know why he chose that number, but he did when he.
Because Fairfield
Fairfield.
changed
Oh,
theirs
sure.
from 2 to 1.5.
Right, but by the way, New Canaan's 1 mile, but anyway, it was gonna be an extra $500,000 to $600,000.
Yes.
$600,000, I thought it was.
This is my point, transportation is very expensive.
We have to
Yeah.
People like that.
today.
Yeah, it was a major number, and as such.
Never gets that number. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah,
It's
I mean,
calculation, correct?
now, we, I
Just get
should,
Ubers.
I should add, we pay
I mean, I got the email.
a high amount on our buses for one basic reason. What they'd like to do, which would bring our costs down, is once you deliver, because remember, our buses are going to multiple schools, but once you're done with the morning, they'd like to park their buses someplace in town, which is what many other towns do.
Yep.
Of course, why wouldn't you?
We don't have any place for them to park.
spot.
As such, we pay more because they gotta go back to Stanford.
Yep.
So,
Norwalk,
or whatever,
yeah.
someplace. In other words, they're not doing it here.
Right.
New
But that's not a
Canaan, New
reimbursement.
Canaan does park their bus.
They all park at the high school.
That's
Yeah,
correct,
they can park there. We don't have that space. As such, our transportation costs are higher. How much higher because of that? I have a lot of information in my head, that's not one of them. But that's part of the reason that I recall that our transportation costs are higher. No place to put the buses. And you can't bring them down to either of the beaches because those roads aren't where you want to be parking, 40 buses and other things like that. Plus, I
Especially
think-
when it flies.
I could just imagine what the neighbors would be saying as well.
Well, you could skip on the tennis courts, you save $500,000 and put the buses right there. I'm just kidding.
How many buses are we talking, Jack? Do you know how many buses we're talking
No,
about?
but I think that should be part of the things, how many we're renting, what it is, and other things like that.
There's not like a table with us.
I'm sure they have that information, but we're requesting it simply to have a better understanding of transportation costs. I think that's a very legitimate question
If they're
to
in
be asked.
mediation, they need to have a good understanding of it themselves over this issue.
Well, because one of the things
Because
they've
whatever
said
mediate
is,
is cost.
yeah, what they've said is like the transportation policy says like it's 2 miles unless there's an unsafe condition which can be reduced. And there are people like crossing over 95 and walking by all the gas stations and everything is an unsafe condition.
And the upcoming construction in that area.
Yeah, well, particularly given the upcoming construction.
Well, there's certain places around homeschool that based upon where the sidewalk ends, but also this is my district, and I feel very strongly about this. If you're on the side where homeschool is on 106, I understand kids walking, there's new sidewalks there, it's fine. To cross on certain roads on what goes there, I mean, I watch the
Oh my
cars go
God,
flying
take your
by.
life in your hands.
And there's a couple of bends there
Couple of
that,
blind turns,
that
yeah.
if you bring those kids there, we're eventually going to end up with somebody killed.
And how many?
So I think that
kids-
one side gets buses and the other side doesn't.
That's right.
And how many kids are affected by this decision? And they have no other way to get there besides walking?
There's a lot of ways to get there.
And
Bikes.
is
Not
there
going
another
anywhere. That's third
alternative between, besides just bringing a bus in?
Roller derby.
You know, if a bus costs X amount,
that's why
maybe
they're
it's
in
cheaper to do
mediation.
some other type of ride sharing for this amount of kids. Thinking out of the box, kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, when you're looking at cost, you have to think out of the box and about.
120 miles.
So it's worthwhile to ask the question. Okay, so here's our next challenge. Our next challenge is to synthesize some of this. Please watch the video, you know, if you haven't already. Don't have a glass of wine with it because you'll only go so far.
Is that from experience?
Yeah. But any other comments, please send. Poor Beth and Peter got about 16 individual emails following the first one. Please respond to anything that you think about. Beth and Peter will put something together. In the past, we have had certain comments on what the state is doing, blah, blah, blah. I do think that we can mention, you know, things that get measured, get managed, but I'd like certain, I might suggest, although quite honestly, with two attorneys writing this, that it's going to be a very small suggestion. The fact is that I look at three, yeah, I can throw you in there and we'll get even smaller. The fact is, I look at, from what I'm hearing, almost three sections. One is a request for more information. And that should be section. One is where we think they may want to look to give further you know, whether or not there's opportunities for them to review certain things. And last is just an overall comment, which may be first, of what the overall feel is. We will discuss these items and basically vote on the document. There may be sometimes, there may be a thought that the Board of Ed has requested this and we support this request. Because I hate to be doing it. Concept is it shouldn't be 10 pages. And, you know, since you and Peter are going to be delivering it, it should be in your voices.
Do we get a copy of this all?
Yes, yeah.
No. And how are we going to vote on it if you don't get it? Yes.
Get my copy of it.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, we did. So, and not to put any pressure on you, Taylor wrote beautifully. She did. Her opening thing was very nice.
I can vouch for Beth's writing.
I wouldn't doubt it. I will provide a listing of various aspects in the budget that we're going to need to look at. I know there's newbies here, but we will have bonding here. I'm assuming there's 3 people here that we're going to be interested in bonding. I know that there's some coverage on Park and Rec. I know some people are particularly interested in what's going on in Park and Rec. My basic philosophy is, even though we do need coverage in all these areas, I would prefer that people are doing the coverage on the Board of Selectmen side on the things that interest you. You know, and we'll figure out where we do military volunteers for the things that aren't covered, or whether or not we need it. I mean, obviously, I don't care about the harbor master. I mean, I do, but we're not reviewing that. It's a small budget. So, is there anything else anybody wants to add? Other than I'm assuming we do not need Wednesday's meeting? We are probably going to have to do, and I apologize, Brad, because I know that you're here in the early part, but we're going to have to do a midweek. I promise it will be midweek and not a Friday.
The 21st is a Tuesday, is that a definite?
Yes.
That's a definite day that we're presenting. So, yes. And we got that from the 14th because they originally wanted the 14th, but thank goodness Deb Ritchie understands that it takes time to turn this around, and in a prior role as vice chair was good enough to raise it to the board.
So midweek next week, you're saying?
Yeah,
Okay.
so I gotta see what they have available and see how we can sneak in. But we definitely will cancel the 20th and Wednesdays. Anything else? Thank you all for your time. I know this was long, but we're getting there. I did not, wait back. I'm sorry. I did not explain excess costs, so I'll do it real quick. Excess costs, we track about 100 students in special ed for what their exact costs are. They take what the average, they calculate what for the school our average student cost is, which may not be the same as what we see on the board, and they multiply that times 4.5 times. Anything over that gets submitted to the state. Well, actually, the whole thing gets submitted to the state for each individual student with their expenses listed, with their 4.5 times, and the difference between that provides us with what the available funds for reimbursement are. This is all put into a pool, and it has to be submitted sometimes. There's 3 submission dates: December, March, I believe, and then the final one in June. So if there was something that we didn't have, the June submission gets paid in August and is not part of what the Board of Ed gets. It goes directly in to the town, and it's part of the educational cost sharing adjustment. It could be up or down depending upon where we are. Part of the problem of excess cost is that because the state has kept that pool at like $147 million or something like that for the last 10 years, other than on election years. They seem to go up for gubernatorial election years. That's true. Everybody submits, and it's then divided up by what the submissions were after they were reviewed, and that determines the reimbursement rate. Historically, the reimbursement rate has been between 72 to 73. We moved that up to 75 in last budget, or the Board of Ed did, based upon certain comments that were made. That's the amount, but we don't really know what that amount might be and what the reimbursement rate might be until March. So if you consider that a lot of the school expenses are paid prior, and if we see a 1% drop in what our reimbursement rate is, it doesn't give a lot of time for the Board of Ed to make payment adjustments on what they're paying and what they're cutting over the next 3 months, especially since probably 70 to 80% of the discretionary spending has to be paid up front. So that's part of the timing issue of how excess costs can be a little bit dicey, and why there was a desire to have it perhaps a little bit understated, because you don't have a lot of time to recover. So they're already down 170,000 based upon what they're projecting they will be submitting, what the new rate is, and the number of students that qualify. But that doesn't mean we know what the reimbursement rate is as of yet. And so the 170, since we budgeted, I believe 75, and they budgeted 75, 1% change in that could have another couple 100,000 in that budget that they're not receiving, that they don't have a lot of time to go and figure out where it's coming from. So,
So that's a cushion.
no, it's not a cushion, it's flexibility. There's a difference.
Okay.
Flexibility, it's built-in flexibility because, it's like you have to make budget June 30th and you're finding out on the 25th of June that you didn't get something in there. You don't have a lot of reaction time to cut. And so that's what's necessary in several of our budgets. So, does that explain? Oh, can we ask for the ECR calculation for this year and come out? Number of students.
That is a big list.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
All in favor? Thank you.